Thank you for being here today. Maya, I'm going to start with you. Can you give us some insight on the S&P Hawkamah Pan-Arab ESG Index and what it measures?
Absolutely. So the S&P Hawkamah ESG Pan-Arab Index tracks the performance of 50 companies, the highest scoring among the ESG score. From the 150 companies, the biggest by the total market capitalization in the underlying benchmark parent index, the S&P Pan-Arab Composite Index. This index was launched back in January 2011, and it is an amazing collaboration between S&P and Hawkamah, such that Hawkamah calculates the ESG score, but also manages and does the research for the ESG score. And S&P provides Hawkamah with the ESG criteria and developed the index methodology.
Thank you so much for that insight. Dr. Ashraf, over a decade ago, you launched this index. Can you tell us about why and what was the driving force behind this?
Yes, the whole idea behind having an index here in the MENA region was simply that corporate governance started to be important in the region. Remember that the first time where we had a code in the region was 2001. So that was almost 10 years after having the first code of the region. So the ideas of ENS started to appear, globally speaking, not so much here. So from our perspective, the idea was to create benchmarking, which will help us to compare our companies to global landscape and what's happening in other regions of the world, and also to create some sort of competition between listed companies in the region so that they try to improve their scores and try to enhance their performance in not just governance, but also ENS.
Great, thank you. Maya, I'm going to come back to the index. Can you talk a bit about the performance of the index and how it's done? We've obviously got a decade worth of data now. If you could give us a bit of insights on that.
Absolutely. The S&P Hawkamah ESG Pan-Arab Index through the end of October 2023 outperformed its parent benchmark, so the S&P Pan-Arab Composite Index, by 68% since its inception in 2011, which is quite remarkable, really. Yeah. And I looked into the drivers for this performance. The results of my analysis show that there are 3 drivers for this outperformance. Number one is that the lowest ESG scoring companies, they on overall historically underperformed the S&P Pan-Arab Composite Index. And because the ESG version with Hawkamah is underweight these lowest ESG scoring companies, it contributed positively to its relative performance. So that's number one. Number two is when we then look at the highest ESG scoring companies, even though on overall these underperformed the S&P Pan-Arab Composite Index, the index methodology of the ESG version with Hawkamah managed to select the winners, if you will, from the overall underperforming highest scoring ESG companies. So this also brings us a really strong selection effect and contributed positively to its relative performance. And lastly, the S&P Hawkamah ESG Pan-Arab Index is overweight sectors such as industrials and utilities, who historically outperformed the S&P Pan-Arab Composite Index. Again, this contributed positively to its relative performance.
Great, that's incredible. If I come back to you, Dr. Ashraf, when we see this sort of performance, do we see that the Middle East is ready for sustainable investing? Are we there yet?
Definitely, yes. We have been witnessing the improvement in sustainability in the region since the launch of the index 2011 until now. Mm-hmm. And we saw how companies are trying to improve their reporting on different issues, how the size even of the reports on environmental and social and governance aspects are really increasing. Yeah. When we started in 2011, many companies even didn't have annual reports, and if they had, it was like few pages, and it was only on the financials, nothing else, and so on. Yeah. And we have been witnessing the introduction of sustainability reporting, integrated reporting, GRI reporting, using international benchmarks and reporting frameworks and so on. So we have seen really the improvements happening. And I have to say that a major part of that is simply because we do have here major sovereign wealth funds which are pushing in this area of good governance and transparency and so on. And they are pushing to have better boards of directors and training for them and making sure that they are really up to the standards of global companies and so on. We have also seen many foreign investors coming. So we have boards which have, investors coming from different regions of the world to, be board members, and they considerably influence practices of these companies and so on. So what I'm trying to say is governments of the region now have been talking about sustainability for many years, and they are encouraging the improvement of sustainability. Not only for listed companies, by the way, for listed companies, financial institutions, and even government-owned companies in many of the countries here are really improving their performance.
And also, when we look at Sharia investing, can you give us a brief on like what the differences are? And, if you're looking at sustainability and Sharia, like how do you compare the two? And do you need both?
We need both because there are certain differences, of course. I mean, I would say Sharia is a different sort of umbrella, if you like.
Yeah.
Because in Sharia, they care for all these factors of ESG, in addition to, being compliant with Islamic laws and regulations. So there are certain sectors you cannot invest money in, certain activities which are forbidden, religiously speaking, so that's you cannot really invest in these sort of sectors. However, for the other part of it, it's very fully compatible. So you would have some investors who are willing to go for the Sharia, which is investing in sustainability, but without certain sectors. And there are certain forms of financing which are not allowed by Sharia, so they don't really want to get engaged in this kind of companies. While the sustainability is sort of different umbrella where lots of things are more sort of allowed, and so again we need the two of them because they serve different types of clients here.
Maya, I'm going to come back to you. You obviously are S&P Dow Jones Indices. Can you talk to us about the trends that are happening globally in the sustainable space, and what do we need to look out for in the Middle East?
No, that's a really good question. The whole world is now looking towards COP28. It's knocking on our door. And I would say that in order to find the next set of solutions, global solutions for the climate crisis, achieving the net zero energy transition is really at the epicenter. So I can't emphasize this enough. So I would say that when we look forward to the upcoming trends that we see at S&P Dow Jones Indices would be kind of innovative solutions that will help investors achieve or contribute towards that energy transition. So what can this be? For example, carbon credit markets. They have the potential to play to help closing the investment gap for the net zero energy transition. So at S&P Dow Jones Indices, for example, we have carbon credit indices that we provide for investors that are looking for such a solution. And then secondly, thematics. So when I say thematics, I mean clean energy, power, water, of course, again, linking it to net zero energy transition. Those kind of, we also offer indices in that area, might resonate really well with investors. And then thirdly, I would say investment solutions such as, for example, green Islamic bonds. When we think about this region, they might have great potential to resonate with investors. And also things like sustainability-linked loans, again, helping to support closing the investment gap for energy transition. So again, everything about the energy transition.
Great. That's a lot for us to be looking towards. I'm going to wrap this with you, Dr. Ashraf. How do we in the Middle East accelerate this transition? What needs to be done to make sure that we're on the right path?
I think having the COP28 here in the UAE is a step in the right direction, and we do anticipate that through the COP28, which is kicked off today, that we'll see a lot of regulatory changes in the region, pushing more for a green and different environmental initiatives. Governments of the region are committed to this, so I can see that regulators will be driving a little bit. But also I see a big responsibility on the boards of directors of companies and private sector, and then the push from investors as well. So I think this trilogy will help us to accelerate the move. Although again, you can see some countries which are really moving fast in this direction, but I think the idea of having regulatory pressures along with, qualified boards of directors and institutional investors, I think this will really accelerate the process.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Dr. Ashraf. That was very insightful.